I still work 24/7 with some other people, especially the Coalition for Dialogue and Negotiation, to advance the respect of human dignity in the Southern Cameroons. So
I am coming from the angle of dialogue. So absolutely, we need an all-inclusive dialogue for this conflict to, come to a logical end. The failed government of Cameroon tried organizing a fake dialogue, which failed woefully because it did not include Ambazonians and major international bodies. We have been in this conflict for 5 years plus. Millions have been left homeless, refuging in squalid conditions all over Africa. Thousands have been killed. Hundreds of villages have been razed to the ground. Children being left, with no education. Thousands locked up in dungeons in La Republique. I think a lot of people are exhausted, and that is me, talking based on my communication with some people on ground zero, which I do a lot all the time. Some of these people have expressed their exhaustion, their frustration with how, our war of independence is being charted. As a human rights activist, or as a human rights, expert, what do we as a people need to do urgently to bring our people to bring this conflict to a logical end and to stop all this suffering and pain on our people? What do you think needs to be done?
Yeah, Abu Free, this is one of those questions that most people are asking and have been asking since 2016. But worst of all, people have been asking these questions even before 2016, when the crisis metamorphosed into a conflict and then into the war we are facing today. And the fundamental question always comes back: what happens to the common man? What happens to the poor people? What happens to the children? And what happens to the women? They are at the mercy of bullets, they are at the mercy of famine, they are at the mercy of starvation, sickness, and every other ill that could fall on human society. But then I always argue that the bus stops with Mr. Biya, because he alone at this point, because he claims sovereignty, he claims constitutional authority over the Southern Cameroons, he has the constitutional authority, therefore, to call this to an end. But without doing that, the responsibility now inverses onto Southern Cameroonians. What should Southern Cameroonians do, as you rightly put in your question to ask? What should Southern Cameroonians actually do to redeem the people of the Southern Cameroons from what they are facing? The first thing is, everybody has said it, and I'll just be adding this, and I hope it is not redundant. It is a question of coordination, a question of leadership, a question of shining the light. Southern Cameroonians are talking about obtaining an independent state, being recognized as a country under international law, being recognized as a member of the international community. And there are certain steps, or there are certain realities that must be set in for other countries to recognize the Southern Cameroons as independent and sovereign. That one of them is having absolute control over the territory, and another one is just being organized in such a way that at least one member of the international community can recognize that we can govern ourselves. Whether we like it or not, the international community and existing states are looking at other situations that have happened around the world. They look at South Sudan. It is not a very positive story today. South Sudan's independence is not very positive because of the calamity that has befallen the country. It doesn't mean that those countries that have been independent since 1960s are not in line or do not fall in the same line of calamities as South Sudan. But the world is not having the appetite to see more people gain independence and then fall along those lines. So the Southern Cameroon's leadership has to come out strongly and show that they can manage a country towards prosperity, towards enhanced human dignity, and not plundering the country back into crisis. And when you look at when you look across the spectrum of what is happening within the Southern Cameroon's liberation movement, you would, unless for other reasons, you should argue and you should face the facts that the intra-group and intra-leadership conflict is one of the reasons that is not advancing this cause towards a logical end. If the leaders of the various groups could sit down and harmonize their points of view, put up one strategic platform on which they can work towards progress, I think the international community can start having some appetite to talk to these people who may be diverse but have a common platform, a common vision. And you've just flashed a picture from Toronto. The Coalition for Dialogue and Negotiation has taken a fantastic lead to bring Ambazonians together. I know those who are collaborating under the ACT platform would argue that the ACT platform is already existing and it should take people forward. I wouldn't want to argue against that, but what we should realize is we now have two platforms that can bring Ambazonians together. At this point, ACT should be thinking about collaborating with those who are under the CDN platform or those who are working to have a CDN platform operative, and those under the CDN platform should be working at having collaboration with those who are under the ACT platform. Because unless I am not informed, most of the movements are now aligned under these two platforms. And I must applaud the activities of the CDN. I must applaud the CDN for taking this initiative, bringing a domestic platform for people of the Southern Cameroons to collaborate, define their future amongst themselves. And that is what is very fundamental here. With the platform proposed by those who attended the coalition's retreat in Toronto, it is very evident that these are home-based solutions without external interference. You know, right. Whereas the ACT is having as anchor the HD and the Swiss, but here we are talking about the coalition which brought together actors, and these actors decided to federate amongst themselves and come up with a working vision. And one thing I know about the coalition's platform is it is work in progress, and the members are defining how they are going to work, how they are going to progress by themselves. So it's something that is being built on solid foundation, and because it is built by the stakeholders themselves, I am sure that we are moving towards having one voice, one platform, one operative formula that can represent the people of the Southern Cameroons. And I think that is a fundamental first step towards redeeming our people from the pain they are going through. Because everything said and done, the government of Cameroon has not shown any interest in talking. Paul Biya has not shown any interest in talking. When you go back to his 31st December speech, he is adamant on fighting. And we all know that whether he fights or he doesn't fight, this conflict is going to end on a table someday. So the earlier the Southern Cameroonians start reflecting and having common points of view, a common vision, it is necessary for them to move towards alleviating the strain and the huge impacts of war that our people are facing in the Southern Cameroons.
Okay, thank you so much for that elaborate response. But so, as you rightly said, right, President Biya is not ready to negotiate with Southern Cameroonians. So it is, of course, you said it's upon Southern Cameroonians to seize their independence. Now, most Southern Cameroonians are saying that the argument of force is their only hope. You, as a human rights activist, what do you say about this?
The first thing I would like to draw here is self-defense is a legitimate right under international law. So once the Southern Cameroonians feel threatened by use of arms, it is legitimate. It is legitimate for them to take up arms and fight back. The question now is the fighting being done following the canons of international war, of loss of international war? I hope so. Sometimes we hear of violations committed by Southern Cameroonians. Most times we hear about violations committed by the government of La Repubblica forces. But if once you realize that you have been challenged so badly that you need to defend yourself, it is legitimate. Even under Christianity, the right to self-defense is legitimate. You can kill if somebody was attacking you with murderous weapons, intending to kill you under Christianity, the fifth commandment. You are legitimately authorized to fight back, and if you kill, you have legitimately defended yourself. And this applies equally under any situation. No one at this point, I just believe no one at this point will be dishonest enough to say that the Southern Cameroonians picked up arms irresponsibly. It was a history of many years when we saw soldiers of Cameroon always being so trigger hungry whenever Southern Cameroonians raised objections to how they were being treated, raised objections to violations of their rights. They would always bring in guns to kill. We can remember Akum Julius, a student from the University of Bamenda, killed on Sonat Street for no just cause. And when people stood up, more were killed. So when this happens, people think about one thing: how do we protect ourselves? So self-defense is a right, it is legitimate, and it can be practiced in as much as it follows the canons. First of all, it must be proportionate. Someone cannot attack you with a knife. Now, someone cannot attack you with a pen and then come out with an atomic bomb. That is not proportionate. But what is happening is guns have been used to kill Southern Cameroonians, and Southern Cameroonians, they even started this thing with machetes and din guns. And I think it will be hypocritical to say that Southern Cameroonians are just venturing for no just cause. There are excesses on the Southern Cameroonian side, but these need to be checked, and they need to respect the canons of what they are doing.
All right, great. Thank you so much. Now, you did mention CDN being a legitimate alliance to, bring in this war of liberation to a logical end. We have some people within the leadership realm of the Ambazonian War of Liberation that totally disagree with this, and I think some of them actually refused attending the event that the CDN put in place in Canada. What do you say to people leadership like this?
First of all, one thing I'd like to make clear is I am a member of the CDN, and I am proud to be a member of the CDN. First thing. Second thing is, it's very easy to criticize from without. Once you don't have the basic information, it's very easy for you to criticize what you don't know. And then the third thing is, it's even far easier to accept, sit and talk with somebody who is proposing to talk. If we say Southern Cameroonians are ready to go and talk with Paul Biya in Switzerland, what makes it so difficult to talk to your own brothers who want to talk to you about what you want to go and talk with Paul Biya in Switzerland? I think there is no harm in talking. You and I are talking here. You can sit from anywhere and talk with any person from anywhere. What are you afraid of?
Right.
Okay, the resolutions of the CDN are out. The resolution of the retreat are out. We have seen them. Have we seen any betrayal language in it? Have we seen anyone from the CDN who is trying to betray the Southern Cameroonian cause? I don't think so. So my only appeal is, if you are ready to talk about resolving the Southern Cameroonian crisis or the Southern Cameroonian war, the first thing is talk amongst yourselves. And for those who attended the coalition organized retreat in Toronto, that was one of the key points. Talk amongst yourselves. Even the foreign diplomats who were there, even those from Switzerland who were there. And I am trying to make this allusion very closely to Switzerland because most of those who are criticizing the Coalition for Dialogue and Negotiation are active members in Switzerland. So even the Swiss were there, So the question is, right, if the people you trust to bring a solution to this war sit and talk with the Coalition for Dialogue and Negotiation, why should you escape? Why should you escape? And of course, if they went there, if If the Swiss were there, attended and spoke with us, and you are faithful servants of the Southern Cameroons, you should ask them for feedback. And if their feedback to you is that the declaration and the statements and the positions made by every individual group that was represented in Toronto is false, then come to the CDN, talk to the members who were there, and they'll clarify you. But so far, I have not seen any organization that was in Toronto that has said something absolutely contrary to the aspirations and the wishes of Southern Cameroonians. So those who still criticize the CDN should be reviewing their position and should remember that sometimes we make mistakes, and when we make mistakes, we can always come back to reason. So there is no need criticizing the CDN at this point, because the CDN has come out forcefully, has come out with an exemplary modus operandi, way of doing things that we should all welcome. The CDN is open. The CDN is talking to everyone, even though they refused to attend the retreat. The CDN is talking to them, because at the CDN, we believe that reason must prevail, not fighting. We cannot fight amongst ourselves and think the other side is not happy that we're fighting amongst ourselves. They're happy we're fighting amongst ourselves.
Absolutely. So thank you so much for clarifying that. For those of you who are joining, I am on. My name is Frida Mambo. My friends call me Abu Free. I am on here with the very eloquent Bernard Galim. He's a human rights activist. And so this is my first guest for today. We are on the interview. This is episode 13, and I have other guests that will be joining us today. So on to Thibault Nagy. What is your overall interpretation of Thibault Nagy's interview?
Very interesting question, Abu Free. First, let me make this clarification very, very important.
I like the fact that you said Abu Free. I like the fact that you said Abu Free, because I just said my friends call me Abu Free.
So, Thibault Nagy, just for the records, Thibault Nagy has been the most consequential foreign and international diplomat regarding this war between the Southern Cameroons and the government of Cameroon. We have not seen any diplomat, any ambassador being so vocal, and so interested in what is happening in the Southern Cameroons. Even while in office, he made statements that made Yaoundé think twice. He tweeted and Yaoundé asked a lot of questions. He tweeted and fanatics in Yaoundé accused the United States of sponsoring Southern Cameroonians. So that is the first thing that we need to incorporate into our minds when we are trying to interpret whatever Thibault Nagy has said. And my overall assessment is that Thibault Nagy is a friend of the Southern Cameroonians. He is a friend of the victims of war. He is a friend who is a friend in need. He is a friend who wants to help Southern Cameroonians out of this war. And the only way you can know your friend is that person who looks at you into your face and tells you what is. Briefly, that person who tells you the truth. And that is what Thibault Nagy has been doing. Thibault Nagy has told a lot of truth about the Southern Cameroonians' struggle, war of independence. And if any person wants to listen to what Thibault Nagy has said, listen with this at the back of your mind. Who is your friend? Is Thibault Nagy my friend? What has he said? And how can I incorporate this into my reasoning and into my actions, trying to help the people of the Southern Cameroons? That is very important. The reason I say this is because I see people criticizing Thibault Nagy. You don't know your friends. You criticize Thibault Nagy because you don't know your friend. You don't want your friend to keep on telling you, oh, my dear, you are so beautiful, when in effect you are not. Or my dear, you are so handsome, when in effect you are not. Or this. No, you don't want what is happening to Paul Biya in Cameroon to happen to you here. CPDM militants and fanatics all always say how beautiful, strong, healthy, good, and excellent a leader he is, whereas he is not. And, when we see somebody who is able to sit down and speak the truth to us, we should listen to them. I hear people insulting him, telling him he blocked himself when he was Under Secretary of State. That is inconsequential. Under Secretary of State, you need to follow state protocol,
Yeah.
And he is the one who left the United States and went to Cameroon to see how this thing can be resolved. He is the one who left the United States, went to France to see how this thing can be resolved. Can we name one foreign minister or one Under Secretary of State, apart from Thibault Nagy, who has taken steps to push for the resolution of this conflict? And of course, you will not expect an ambassador to come out on air and tell you what he discussed under diplomatic circles. That doesn't happen. But when he tells you something, and he tells you he's not going to tell you what was said behind the scenes in diplomatic circles, but then tells you something, you need to understand that what he is telling you is definitely has its origins from what the international community thinks. And Thibault Nagy, again, I would say is a friend of the Southern Cameroons, and he's a friend of the victims.
So thank you for that. So when pressed on Ambazonian leadership, especially on the interim government question, Thibault Nagy said, Ambazonians lack leadership. Why would Ambazonians who identify and belong to different groups agree with Thibault Nagy on the issue of
this is one of those questions that we would always fight amongst ourselves. The person asking the question to Thibault Nagy in fact went on to ask Thibault Nagy that, but there is an interim government, and he said, do you have a foreign minister? So you see, the fundamental question here is, leadership is legitimacy. In as much as we have series of groups, in as much as we have a series of groups, and every person belongs to one group, there is no group that has an overall authority all over the other groups. You can call yourself the interim government. Now we have two, and I hear we'll soon be having three in the days ahead. I remember when I was hosting the 10-1 conversation, I put this question to Professor Carlson Anyangwe, whether he has any regrets that the interim government has changed the dynamics of what was supposed to be a liberation movement. Even though he didn't give me a clear answer, I understood that just the fact that Sako splintered from Siseko was not a positive move. And now we have two interim governments. Once you start claiming authority that you don't have, this is how we end up. Whereas if we agreed and put strategies or covenants in place to work collaboratively without necessarily forcing somebody to come under you, but we agree that, okay, we are going to have a template or a format of leadership that we're going to use going forward. That should have been easier. So as it stands, even in Toronto, those diplomats, the foreign community said they have not seen any leadership. So those who have at the back of their minds that they are the legitimate representatives of the Southern Cameroonians need to review this thought. At least once you constitute yourself, you will then have somebody recognizing you as a government. And we cannot be running away from overzealous power people. I don't want to call them power mongers. And then we are trying to replicate that identity in a place we don't yet have. We are trying to go home, and we are not yet home, and we are already fighting over power. Whereas, what is pushing people back and out of where we have been all this while is the quest to hold power. So we cannot claim we are running away from dictatorship and we are practicing dictatorship, and we expect the onlooker to believe that we are serious. It's not going to happen. And again, let me just land on this. I am proud again to say that the CDN has done an elaborate study on this. You saw the surveys, you know that there's been consultations between the CDN and the various groups. And the CDN is working very hard day and night. I can promise you, the CDN is working day and night to make sure that those who agree to talk amongst themselves continue talking amongst themselves and developing a platform. And leadership is not, in my view, right? Leadership is not one person. Leadership is an assembly of people who agree amongst themselves and decide on what to do, especially in a vision like this, in a movement like this. Once the building steps take root and align with that's amongst those who are sitting on the CDN platform, I'm sure we're going to have a complete change in this revolution. The tone, the approach, communication, collaboration is going to be completely different, and that is what is going to sell the Southern Cameroonians as people who know where they are going to, they know what they need to do, and they are doing it. Because mind you, the most difficult part is not even attaining that sovereign and independent state. The most difficult part is starting from scratch as people with no control over you, with no fear for anyone. How will you manage yourselves? That is why it is necessary that we subscribe to the CDN vision of building all the criteria, all the parameters, all the steps of attaining and managing independence and sovereignty.
Okay, thank you so much. I actually have a follow-up question or maybe a comment, but before I get to that, IT team, if you can play a short clip for us with what we're talking about.
Right. Are you not aware that there is the interim government of Ambazonia that is essentially prosecuting the war on the ground? It commands the fighting force on the ground, and it commands the diplomatic aspect of the struggle.
Do they have a foreign minister?
They do, sir.
Well,
are you saying that you were never contacted during your tenure in office?
No, I was not.
Now, when you spoke to Congress a while ago, still in I think 2019, you made reference to what U.S. policy is. And you stated in that presentation that U.S. policy is to maintain the current borders of Cameroon. Mm-hmm. We're wondering what you mean by the current borders. Do you see the possibility, sir, in the future of the U.S. recognizing the borders of the southern Cameroons at independence?
Again, I can't speak for U.S. policy.
What is your opinion on that, sir?
But let's be realistic. U.S. policy, as any policy in the world, undergoes change. So if circumstances on the ground change dramatically, then of course we could posture that U.S. policy would change with that. When I was speaking, I was reflecting the U.S. policy of the day. So you have to ask my successor, Assistant Secretary Fee, or the Secretary of State, to see what the possibilities are. But of course, U.S. policy changes as we discussed with Somaliland, because who knows where that will go.
So, would you agree with me that the fact that we have more than 3 leadership running our war of independence, will you agree with me that it's a major problem?
I would want to look at the kind of problems. I would like to know how you define your problems in this case. But before I get to that, you see Tibor's reaction when Chris asked him about the interim government. He does not only talk, but he laughs, and he doesn't laugh like it's funny. He laughs in a kind of a mockery. He mocks at Chris. Yeah. Indirectly, he's mocking at the interim government, the notion of the interim government, and even mocking at those who believe in this notion. And I think it's very important that we read what people write, what people say, and what people portray. That is very important. Tibor is very clear in his answer. You are not the government. That's a simple thing he says. And he asks, do you have a foreign minister? That's just one of the criteria that he said that he's a government. He knows that there is a public relations officer or something like that with the interim government. And I even know that he had received one of them before. He must have received people claiming to be the government of the Southern Cameroons. But he has digested this while in office and out of office, and the best answer he could give to Chris is to mockingly laugh at this insistence of a government that is prosecuting the war. But it is just a group, and we should just accept that it's a group, and this is one of those groups that are leading Southern Cameroonians toward in this fight.
Absolutely, and I think before I come back to the question that I asked, I don't know if you did listen to Dr. Ayaba's message today, this morning, where he said, the IG, in quotes, the IG has sometimes morphed into a more dangerous beast. I think we all know, where he's coming from with that statement. But the reason why I asked that question with regards to leadership being, more than three leadership arms in a revolution like ours is because you put people in a confused state, right? You put people in a confused state in the sense that, for example, we have lockdowns, right? You have this group saying lockdown is going to happen for 3 weeks, or you have this group refuting any form of lockdown. So you put people in that confused state of mind because they don't know who to listen to. They don't know who to listen to or who to align with. So that is a major problem, per my observation, because you cannot, in a revolution like ours, or in a war of liberation like ours, where we are just fighting to get our due freedom, and then you have a bunch of people speaking on behalf of 8 million people with different messages. So that puts a conflict, in what we are seeking. So that is where I came from. Do you think having more than one leadership, isn't that a major problem?
To be honest with you, in an idealistic world, we would have one leadership. But in a real world where we deal with human beings, we cannot have one leadership. Now, considering that we cannot have one leadership in the real world, what do we need to do? I think that's a question we should be asking. And the answer to that question is we need to comport, or we need to make ourselves understand that in as much as we have different manners of operation, we have different visions, but we have one objective. We can start talking amongst ourselves. Power is something that is very dangerous. Everybody likes to have power. Very few people don't like power. And once it happens that we are in a situation like ours, where people have started having power, there is need for that thermostat, right? That helps the various groups to tone down when they are going too high, or come up when they are going too low. The CDN is playing that role. But now, what I would like to kind of emphasize here is we cannot have one group. But because we cannot have one group, we need people to come together and talk. And at the end of the day, everybody is still not going to come down together to talk, because there are interests. I don't know, I'm not accusing anyone, but you would accept with me that if Cameroon could create satellite parties to fight against the SDF and other prominent opposition parties, it would not be strange to know that Cameroon has created other groups within the Ambazonian liberation movement to fight amongst themselves. So everybody cannot sit down, everybody cannot talk, but there is need for a massive convergence towards a point where people understand how they talk and what they say, and where they should say it.
Okay, well, thank you so much. We are going to come back to leadership, but going back to Thibault Nagi's interview with Comrade Chris Anu, Mr. Thibault alluded that the Swiss process is just a process and not yet thought a solution. As someone who has interviewed people in and out of the Swiss initiative and gathered information about the Swiss initiative, do you share Mr. Nagi's view?
Before I give my point of view here, I want to say that I have spoken with a lot of people, both in and out of Switzerland. I've spoken to John Bakuru, I've spoken to Dr. Julius Mia, I've spoken to Dr. Ayabacho, I've spoken to Karim, I've spoken to Goji Gorge's son, I've spoken to Albert, in fact, many people. And one thing I get across, especially from those who are not yet in Switzerland, is they all agree that they want a mediator. They want someone to bring Cameroon on the table. But where they disagree is how to do it. And they have raised some elements or some questions that appear very fundamental to them and should be fundamental to every person. Let me cite John Bakuro. He was very emphatic. He said the Swiss are just there. They are not going. They are not leaving. And this is giving a shield to Cameroon so that when any other international community member wants to say, okay, let's go, let's try to negotiate on this, they will say the Swiss are there. But the Swiss are not going, the Swiss are not moving, the Swiss are not doing anything. And in some way, Thibault has said these same words. I think if you had listened to my interview with John Bakuro and listened to what Thibault Nagy said, it's almost the same thing. It is just a process. Just to say, okay, there is a process. Let's do something. No, the Swiss are there. That is what Chris has said, and that is what Thibault has said. On the other side, Abdul Karim, who's been there, he gave me a lot of assurances that the process is going on well and the process is going to achieve results coming forward. Now, I tried as much as possible to speak to Bo Herbert, who is like the spokesperson of the act regarding the Swiss meetings, but I could not land an interview with him. Sometimes it's difficult to get people to sit on interviews. But one thing that I would be appreciative of is let our brothers who are in Switzerland at least come out now. I think it's 2 or 3 years down the line. They could come out now and tell us that when we went to Switzerland, we expected A, B, C, and D, and these were the criteria we expected to meet A. These were the criteria we expected to meet B. These are the criteria we expected to meet C. These criteria we expected to meet D. And we have met this, and this. We have not met this, and we think that we would do this to meet the rest of the criteria, because so far we are not getting much communication from Switzerland as we used to do in the past.
It's a very big task.
Yeah, it could be indicative of the fact that the initiative is dying. It could be indicative of the fact that there is no progress. It could be indicative of the fact that the aspirations were set too high and have not been attained. It could equally be indicative of the fact that the momentum in Switzerland is dying. But one thing is very clear: the representative of Switzerland in Toronto actually said that they have not brought Paul Biya to the table. And that is one of the points that the act was very emphatic on. They said that Cameroon is already on the table, though Cameroon has never made a public statement. From their actions, they have never shown that they want to talk. And from their actions, they have always shown that they want to fight. And talking is not part of the agenda. But so far, we are not seeing any movement towards this direction. So it would be more reasonable to agree with Thibault Nagy here that it is just a process to have a process to block other processes. And I think John Bakuro also summarized this very well when I spoke to him. So like participants in Toronto said, open up, make it multilateral. And when I spoke with Dr. Ayaba Cho and Dr. Nyi, this is the fundamental position of the Ambazonia Governing Council. They will not sit in any dialogue that is managed by one party. Open it up, bring in other parties, let it be multilateral. And the Toronto Declaration emphasized on this. It needs to be multilateral. We need to have more parties coming in, sitting there and observing and helping with the procedures. We cannot leave it solely to Switzerland. And this is 2021. They have been there for some time. I think it's time for them to come out and give us a position statement and tell us what they expect and where they are going to. The coalition is very ready to help and move this forward.
Okay, so thank you. I think you already answered my my number 4 question. So I'm going to, you're really moving ahead of me, Comrade Bernard, man. But thank you so much.
Sometimes you do that.
So
Sometimes you talk too much.
one more question. I think you're probably reading my thought process. So, but I give it to you. One more question for you on Tibor Nagy before we move to. I hope you have time to answer some questions on leadership as well. But most Ambazonians believe the USA can lead negotiations. Tibor Nagy said the USA and France enjoy harmonious relationships. Do you think the USA can pressure France to take any reasonable action to pressure Cameroon to join Ambazonians in Switzerland?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is that is one that needs a lot of reflection. But Thibault made it very clear. Thibault was very emphatic. France and Cameroon have a very strong relationship. France and the United States have a very strong relationship, especially in the fight against terrorism. Now, how can the United States force France to pressure Cameroon to go to the negotiation table? It's a different question on its own, and it needs an in-depth analysis. But when you look at the world, the geopolitical organization of the world, one of the conclusions I've come on to is that most of Africa, even Anglophone-speaking countries in Africa, are kind of under the French sphere of influence. The United Kingdom is not so much interested in having colonies abroad in the modern age. So, and because the United States and France are so interested in having this overseas domination, what I see is that the relationship in fighting terrorism in the Sahel, in the Lake Chad region, is mostly coordinated by France with the support of the United States. And the United States has a higher priority in fighting terrorism over other things. And you would bear with me that when Thibault was in office with President Trump, the push was really high between from the United States, and it was directed straight to Cameroon. And as Thibault said, the policy changes with the government. According to the United States Constitution, the executive, the president, is responsible for international relations. So it depends on the president that is there to make those decisions. And when Trump was there, Thibault was kind of working directly with Yaoundé, kind of paying attention directly with on what is happening on the continent. And he actually said that we should now talk to Ambassador Fee, who replaced him, to see her vision. But since Biden took over office, it's a year now, and we have had Tony Blinken's speak, I think, just once or twice about the Southern Cameroons, and it's ended. I think there is much that needs to be done. And I don't see the current administration of the United States being that forceful, being that interested in fighting this directly. One of Joe Biden's policies or campaign messages was the United States is back to build relationship with allies. And building a relationship with France would mean that France would have the most important say on what is happening, or what is going to happen in the Southern Cameroons or with Cameroon. And I don't see Joe Biden having that interest to bypass France and strike or pressurize Paul Biya. This could just be based on assumptions, from my reading of issues. Also remember that since the former ambassador left, the United States has not appointed an ambassador to Yaoundé. Now we have Christopher Lamora going in. Maybe Christopher's arrival there is going to change things, but the final decision is made by the president. And Thibault made this very clear in his interview, though. But he was just part of the chain. And foreign policy decisions, again, coming from Thibault, are not necessarily made only by the president. The business world is hugely involved. And you will remember that some time ago, they uncovered a lot of lobby firms in DC, New York, that Paul Biya had paid to be whitewashing their image here It is still going on. The fact that we've not seen it does not mean that there are no more lobby firms. There are lobby firms there that knock on those offices, get into those offices, talk to those people, and get what they want. So it's still going on, and people will definitely have different impressions of about what is going on. And it boils down to interest, especially Thibault was very clear. And I said this at the beginning. Thibault is a friend, and he told us what we need to hear and what we need to do. The business world is very interested in the definition of foreign policy. We cannot ignore them. We cannot just ignore them. And one other thing is, speaking for the victims, human rights organizations are very important. We cannot ignore human rights organizations. We cannot attack them. We need to know our friends. We need to know when our friends are speaking the truth to us, and we need to know how to react to our friends. That is what we call leadership. That's what we call diplomacy. But the world is very dicey. A United States president has just 4 years if he is maintained 8 years, and it's hardly ever possible to have one party in the United States have 16 years or even 12 years. So the earlier Southern Cameroonians realized that it's time to redefine strategy, time to sit down and talk about diplomatic approaches, and diplomatic outreach is also very important. And to take note of the 1 year of Biden's administration where nothing forceful has come out of the United States towards Cameroon is also going to be a strong point to note. Amongst all the countries in the world, it's only the United States under President Trump and Thibault Nagy that suspended military training, military help to Cameroon, cut Cameroon off AGOA because of crimes they're committing in the southern Cameroons. So it's very important that we kind of put these very salient points in our minds and see how we can influence or lobby the American government, if we can, to take things going forward.
Yeah. And I think that's, I think that's what we have slapped, on when it comes to lobbying. I think we used to do that a lot, but I think, I myself, I
think it was being done in those days, but as Thibault said, it was done haphazardly. It was not coordinated. Today, I would come in. Today, Chris Anu will go in and say, "I am the spokesperson of the interim government of Ambazonia," and then I put my point and then I go out. And then the next day, Milton Takan comes in and says, "I am the spokesperson of the interim government of Ambazonia." Then he goes out. Then the next day, Akosan Raymond comes in and says, "I am the spokesperson of the Ambazonia Governing Council. We are the legitimate representatives of Ambazonia." He goes out. The next day, Bo Herbert comes in and says, "I'm the spokesperson of Maurice. I'm the legitimate representative of the people of Ambazonia." Then he goes out. So,
and that is why I was talking about leadership.
That is why I was saying that the CDN is bringing out a platform, a domestic platform, a home-based platform where we can sit and talk and strategize on our approaches.
Right, and you also talk about the US and France working hand in gloves to fight terrorism, and I had to laugh at that, not at you though, but at that the fact that the US and France especially fighting terrorism, and we know that France is a terrorist when it comes to the Africa's economy, or French Africa's economy, as well as their political system. We know how France has terrorized that region of the continent, and I'm sure you're familiar with what is happening in Mali today, where the Malians are fighting, France and ECOWAS. Are you familiar with what is going on?
I've been watching some of that on the news, and it's quite interesting, But in this story, we would need to know how the United States and France are viewing that. It's not just It's not just about what we think; it's also about what they think.
Do you think it's gonna affect our story in any way?
If the United States continues believing that France should take the first step, it's definitely going to affect the Southern Cameroon's liberation movement, because I think if Malians are rising against France in Mali, it can easily spread across West Africa. And if it spreads across West Africa, the Malians, the French stronghold now would only be in Central Africa. That's where the French are strongly entrenched in Africa. It's really in Central Africa. So the French would rather be building their capacities further in the Central African region, sub-region, you know. So, yes, it's going to affect the Southern Cameroon's liberation movement.
Okay, thank you so much for that. I absolutely 100% think it's definitely going to affect the movement. I'm going to share my point on that later on. Do you have some few minutes, or do you have to leave now?
I could avail 2 minutes.
2 minutes is not going to do the trick, Comrade Bernard. It's not going to do the trick. I wanted to talk a little bit about the splinter IG groups. Yeah, so 2 minutes is not going to do the trick, but if you just have a second, well, let's see how much you have to say. What are your thoughts when it comes to the SACO group, right, which is, on the verge of collapse, or maybe already, has already collapsed? What do you think is happening within that group?
It's something I've not followed up for very, very keenly. But one thing that I know is that there is this song in the hymnal of the Catholic Church that says that a house that was built on sand was easily taken away by the wind. What I think and what I know is that the interim governments were not built on solid foundation. That is why they are collapsing at such a fast rate. So I think it's from the Sisiku splinter to the SACO now to the ANU. It's kind of happening very fast, and it was predicted. It was predicted. It was predictable rather, because they were not really built on stone, and some people might have not been visible enough, might have not been seeing a lot of these people before. But what I know is that maybe they have been existing in the movement, but they had not yet built their political or their revolutionary acumen to withstand the pressures of such a long journey. A movement like this one is a long journey. It's not a sprint. So these are just one of the signs that to do such a movement, to be in such a movement, to lead such a movement, you should be prepared for a long journey, for a long marathon. It's not a sprint. Okay. Maybe it's not a walk in the park.
Well, hey, nothing is a walk in the park. It's always, everything. I always tell people that it's mindset, right? When you put your mind to get something done, you're going to do it, regardless of what people say or what. But anyways, with regards to the IG, honey. But thank you so much, Comrade Bernard. I really appreciate you for being on today. You have been wonderful. Is there anything you want to close